All right, well, it is 4:05 and it might just be the two of you, in which case you're going to get a customized Google Docs workshop.
Awesome.
So today we're going to actually work from a Google Doc. I'll just be sharing my screen and we'll have a Google Doc and you guys will jump right in and I'll walk through a few things and then have plenty of time, probably a whole lot of time, to take your questions. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. In 1 second. Okay, can you all see a doc? Set the Google Docs mini workshop. Yes, I see thumbs up, which is awesome. Okay, I am going to drop the sharing link into the chat and I'll invite you guys to go ahead and click on that link and it should open up. You might have to have a Zoom window and a doc window. That's the really tricky part if you only have one screen. Go ahead and hop in there. And if you'll go ahead, you should be able to drop your cursor into the top section where it says type your responses here. And hopefully you ought to be able to enter what you'd like to know about Google Docs. Let me know how that goes.
So Robbie, it looks like I cannot actually type in there.
Yeah, I don't have editor access.
I bet I didn't give you editing access. So this is the first lesson. Sharing the doc is not the same as giving people editing access. So anyone on the internet with this link can view, look at me making a newbie mistake. We can change them from viewer, click on the word change, to editor. Now try. I can pretend like I did that on purpose so I'd have a teaching moment. Let's see if that lets you. Woohoo! All right. Great. So Ty, let's know if the ear in there. Oh, yep, good. Great. So what would you like to know about Google Docs? Is there any burning question or a specifically tricky thing aside from permissions, which I just demonstrated, which I will show again in more detail. But
I was kind of wondering if there's a way to avoid like what just happened where I was typing in the same place that Andrea was typing, because I opened up a doc with 22 students and they all start typing in the same spot.
Yes, so some ways to do that are to format your document ahead of time with like spaces where, you know, if you have your students working in groups, for example, you could have them do that. You could just instruct them to note that you can see my cursor. I don't know what color my cursor is showing up to you guys, but on my screen, Ty, yours is a blue cursor and okay. Andrea, yours is purple. So I can see where you are in the doc. So I can try to put myself elsewhere. So it is a little bit messy, but so is brainstorming, right? If you're trying to just get everybody to brainstorm in a document at the same time, that's great. If they're specific, like say, for example, you want students to address questions together, you know, you might say, okay, group A, I want you to take this question. And so then you only have 2 or 3 or 4 students who know where in the doc they should be typing. That's another way to manage that. Andrea, do you have specific questions?
Robbie, I wasn't able to see when I know how to share a document, but I don't know how to allow other people to edit the doc. So can you just walk me through that?
Yeah, so how about, I'm gonna walk through the demos at the end.
Yes. But
that's something you for sure wanna see. Let me go through the other stuff we promised in the workshop about like how to use it in teaching, and then we'll do just some demo time if that works out for you guys. Perfect. And anytime, it's only 2 of you. Anytime you have a question or you want me to pause and talk more about it, just go ahead and just say your thing. That'll be fine. So why use Google Docs? Well, a really important reason to use it in your teaching is because it's free. And, you know, the Microsoft Office is expensive. And getting more expensive all the time, it feels like. So our students often want the free option, are accustomed to the free option. So it's a free alternative to Word. I would also argue a much more convenient alternative to Word once you learn it. It's included in our Boxer apps. So everybody who has a PUNet ID and password has their own free Google Docs, Google Slides. They have the entire Google Suite for free. Most students are already familiar with Docs. So every time I say that, somebody says, well, I have had a student who doesn't know how to do it. Well, sometimes you will. But often when students are collaborating, I've seen this over and over again, if they're asked to do something, they just open a doc. They share a doc with each other. And part of that, I think, is coming because students in K-12, maybe not all the way down to K, but it's very common in K-12 to use Google. It's become much more commonplace tool, partly because it's free and because it's collaborative. So our students tend to use them very naturally. That's sort of their default, as opposed to Word. So really important reason for teaching, especially, is that you have a collaborative functionality that you just don't have with Word, unless Word is being integrated into like Box and it's posted to Box and there's permissions set on those folders. But all of that is multiple, it's like a layer over the word processing to begin with. So Google Docs are meant to be collaborative by their design. And that's a tremendously powerful tool for teaching. Because you as the teacher and anybody who's added as an editor to a doc can comment, suggest, co-edit. Those different things are here under the pencil. You can just suggest, in which case you don't, if you change it, let me show you. If you were to change yourself, instead of editing to suggesting, I could say, right, so now I changed it, but I suggested a change. So someone would have to okay that for that change to go through, or that someone can reject that suggestion and it drops back. That's a really good thing to do if you're trying to like show a student how to write something differently within one of their own sentences, so they can still see their own original writing. Commenting is a key function for feedback. It's also a key function just to collaborate with others, and or co-editing. It is possible when we see the permissions again to just have someone be a commenter and not actually an editor. What's really cool about Docs is that you can view the history. So even if things get changed, deleted, removed, you can just go under File and see the version history. And what opens up here is all of the history of revisions on that doc. And you can click on an earlier one. It won't look much different, but let's just click on the one from before we started typing. And you can see that there were no responses. And if we wanted, we could restore this version instead of the version where we're currently in. But let's just keep the version we're currently in now, and we can see the difference. Very helpful if students are making revisions or editing. You can see it in real time. So can't do that nearly as easily with Word. Now, Word may have buried somewhere in its functionality ways to do some of these similar things, but Google Docs was meant to do this. And so it's really up front in the machinery of this tool. So some ways to use these docs in your classes, which is the second thing we promised you in the workshop description. Really, probably I would say the most powerful way for a doc is to give feedback to student writing, because you can make comments in the sides that are much less cumbersome than track changes. You don't have to open their file, download their file, save a copy with your comments, upload it back again, or in any way, just you don't have to pass a file back and forth. These changes happen right on the doc. And the reason is, this is probably the most important thing I'll tell you in the whole workshop, is that even though Google Docs can be used to make Word documents, like a word processing tool, and Word is a word processing tool, they're really different animals. They're different species entirely, because Word is a file. It creates a discrete file that doesn't have to be connected to the internet at all. It's a bit of file, the bit of data that lives on whatever storage device it's stored on. Whereas a Google Doc is a web page on the web. And that's why to share it, you share a link, a URL, because it's actually a web page, not a file that's stored somewhere on your computer, if that makes sense. So it's a way to, everybody is just making updates on a web page on the web instead of passing a file back and forth, which is just less cumbersome, at least in my opinion, and many people's opinion. It's more convenient than Box, at least in my experience. I think students don't default to Box, but they do default to Google Docs, which tells you a little something about usability. It can be integrated with Box, however, which actually just puts, in my opinion, a layer of cumbersome on top of what's less cumbersome. But sometimes you have to have, maybe not in classes, but in some maybe clinical stuff, you might have to have something protected behind our Box storage, in which case Google Docs can be used through that. But beyond all of those layers, just a straight up Google Doc is pretty simple. And it's really easy for multiple folks to share thinking and to offer feedback to each other. So that's a really powerful reason to use it. It can be really great to have a collaborative class notes, whether you have one doc with 30 students and everybody takes notes during the class, or it's a rotating responsibility. A different student is the class note taker each class session, and that this file is just shared with everybody in the class, and others can add to it, make comments, ask questions. Right? You can think how pretty quickly you get a living document that everybody can access instead of a fixed file that lives on somebody's computer and has to be actively shared, downloaded, opened to even see it. Powerful for group work for that main reason. There's one file that they're all taking notes in, one file where they're all putting thinking or resources or collecting links or whatever they do. It also allows you real-time monitoring and mentoring of what they're writing as they write it. So if you've got them working in breakout rooms, for example, if you're on Zoom, or you have them working in groups out asynchronously, not in class or somewhere else, you can hop into that doc anytime and see what they're saying, see what they're writing, see how they're doing, check on their progress. And that's just a really powerful tool. It's also a very natural and holistic archive of any group conversation or brainstorming. Instead of each person writing it in their notebooks and you don't have any idea what they wrote or what they said or cool ideas they thought of, if they put their collective thinking in a Google Doc, then you just have an archive of it. Everybody can see the notes, but also it lives in a common place where you guys can go back and see it, and then do all kinds of fun things with it. It's really useful for crowdsourcing. Like, let's all collect our great ideas about this theme, or any resources, YouTube videos, other web pages, books you've read, articles about a topic. A Google Doc for that can be really useful. It's also powerful for co-creating, which is a specific sort of teaching strategy where the students help to make the content for the class. So it might be that a student or a group of students even creates a study guide or a reading guide or some other important component that becomes teaching material, learning material in the class. And Google Docs is a powerful tool for that. Some tips if you're going to use Google Docs to create effective assignments: you should specify the sharing settings that you want them to do, and might need to show them how to do that. And also submission instructions. We're going to talk a little bit more about how to maybe submit these things to Moodle, because it's not the same as just uploading a file, because you don't have a file unless you ask Google to push out a file for you, because it's a web page that lives in the web. So you want to make sure you include that. Note that it's very easy to make comments, right? You just highlight something, and then this little blue add a comment box pops up on the side, and you can click it and you can make a comment. And that's how you can make comments to each other. That's how students can ask you questions. That's how they can offer feedback to each other. You can actually make a comment on a comment. You can feel free to try that if you'd like. You can just click on the comment and then it lets you reply. So it's very handy. You click on the one in the margin there. Very natural way to make comments. You might consider setting up, as if you're thinking about using these for assignments, some faculty have found it useful to create folders or docs within their own Google Drive, where and then a folder for each student in your class, and then you make a file. Maybe you make a Google Doc file that's our check-ins or something, and you can then control permissions on those items so that only you and the student will see them or can access them. Or maybe you want to assign a group and you want to make the doc. You can totally do that. It's just, once you know the functionality of the tool, it helps you to have ideas about how to sort of organize them and use them. If you're going to be collecting assignments through Moodle, I hope you are. If you are, then you want to just be sure that in submission types, you enable online text so that students can copy and paste the URL into that online text, because it doesn't help them to do a file upload, because they probably won't have a file to upload unless they know how to generate a file from a Google Doc, which most of them probably do. But if you want to be able to edit it, make comments, feedback, you want the URL, you want the link to their course or to their doc. So you want to, by default, online text is not enabled. So that's just something to remember. And I can show you how to get there too. The last important sort of thing to think about when you're thinking about them as assignments is that docs are collaborative by their nature. Any students who've been using docs are probably using them collaboratively, maybe not every time, but it's natural for students to default to sharing and collaboration in docs. So if you don't want, if it's not appropriate for students to collaborate with others, you want to be clear about that in your assignment, because if they're working in docs or you're directing them to docs, if they aren't already using them, they probably are. But remember that it's a collaborative workspace. So they might by default, not by any intention of being academically dishonest, they might default to sharing. So just be really clear if this is a kind of the given assignment is something you should or should not collaborate with others on. And then we get to sharing permissions, and these are fixed images, and I'm going to walk through them live in a minute, but I wanted you guys to have access to them if you have this doc to refer to later. When we do sharing and permissions, there's a couple of things. There's basically two windows. You can see these two little windows. One of them is where you can just share them with specific people. So if I were to put, Andrea, your name here, I could share it just with you and me. And then nobody else, even if they have the link, can get to it. And then I think you would default to editor in that case. You could put a whole list of people here if you want to. It's a little cumbersome to do an entire roster of students, but you could do that if that was really important to you. The other way to share with people is to just say, to change the sharing permissions down here, where basically you're saying who can access this link. And you can set it to only people at Pacific University can view if they have the link. Or you can click on change and open that up to something else. So if you click on change, then you get this little view here. And by default, it just says Pacific University. That means that the user has to be logged in with their Pacific account. And sometimes if a user, students or colleagues have a personal Gmail account and they're logged into that and they don't realize it, they won't be able to get in. So Pacific University, if you select this option, you have the most, it's restricted to only Pacific U people. So it's a little bit more restricted. But anyone with the link avoids access problems. So you'll just have to weigh those two options. Bear in mind that if they have the link and they don't share it with anyone, if that link is posted in Moodle, then unless somebody from Moodle chooses to share it out with others, nobody else is going to be able to access it probably. But it's not as secure as if it's just Pacific University, then they have to have a PUNet ID to get in. Or you just share it with specific people. So those are some things to think about when you're directing students to sharing permissions or setting those sharing permissions yourself. So here's where it looks like on the hoof or in the wild. The sharing button is up here in the corner. And when you click on that, you can add people. And notice that when I search, you can either do the preferred email or this one that has the PUNet ID. I often will go with this because that's sort of the Gmail Gmail is going to recognize that, or Google Docs is going to recognize that. So I could share it directly. Notice that the default is editor, but if I didn't want that, I could just say you can only view, you can just make a comment, or you can actually edit the doc. By default, it's going to send a little notification in your email. If I don't put a message here, you won't get a message. You'll just say Robbie Pock is trying to share a document with you. You don't have to do that. You can uncheck it if you want to. But as soon as you are done, you can say share. And now it's shared also with anybody who has the link and with Ty. But that's the first part where you add just one person, and they are by default are editor. But the other part is this link. And the default is actually not anyone with the link. The default is restricted. This is what it normally looks like. If I say done, you guys probably can't access it for a second because I just changed the permissions, but I'll fix it. So notice that it says restricted, only people added up here can open the link. But you can change it by clicking on this, share with Pacific. Okay, now anybody with a PUNet ID can get it. They're a viewer by default. So if I want anybody with the link, notice it's defaulting to viewer, which was the mistake I made to start with. If you want them to be able to comment, you can change it to commenter or editor. This is obviously the most open. Anybody in the universe who has an internet, has this link, can edit this document, which is fine with me. The only thing to note is if you have like a template and you want to share it with your students and you want them to technically make a copy of it for themselves, you might not want to have it set to editor. You might want to set it to viewer only, and then they have to make a copy, or you just tell them specifically, make a copy, and you want to have a backup in your files because they might overwrite the stuff. It's good to have a backup. Now you could go back into the history and restore it if you wanted to, but that's sharing permissions. Andrea, are there any other questions about it? Well, actually, I didn't do the most important things. So I'm ready to share it with someone. I need to get the link. I can click on copy link here and then just copy straight to my dashboard. So then I have that link to share with folks. It won't work to copy what's in the HTML. What's in the address bar. That is not the one you want. You want to go through the share button to get that URL copy link. And then I could drop that anywhere. One more thing I'll show while we're in the doc, and then we have just a few minutes. I'll show you what it looks like for someone to submit it in Moodle. You can see what that looks like if someone submits it to Moodle if you're trying to grade something. So if a user goes to file, download, this is how you can go from essentially a web page, which is what a Google Doc is, to a discrete file that people could then move around and pass around. There are lots of options here. It will go to a Microsoft Word doc, but be aware, it's going to probably make the formatting a little wonky. The formatting between Google Docs and Word doesn't always play nicely. PDF is just a PDF that nobody can edit. And this is what I would recommend if you want your students to give you a hard copy of something that they're making in Google Docs and you want a discrete file. You could just ask for, download it as a PDF, please. And then that's what you would get. There are lots of other tools, but it will take us a long time to get there. Talk about them too much, but they're basically the same tools that you'll have in Word. The buttons might look a little different and they might be in a different place, but you can do pretty much anything you can do in Word, you can do in Google Docs, most things. Okay, so let's look at the Moodle page really quick, just so I can show you what it looks like when a student has uploaded a link to an assignment. Now, this is an assignment tool. This is a forum. If you are the only one who wants to see it and you're going to grade it, you can ask them to submit to the Google Docs, to submit the Google Doc to an assignment. This is the instructions I put in here. It's 2 steps I want, and I actually have done this with students before. Please copy and paste a link to the doc in the online text box. So I enabled the online text box so I can make offer. feedback, make revisions to my own instructions. And then I asked them also to download the Google Doc as a PDF and upload that in the submissions box. So this assignment has both of those active, an online text and a file submissions box, so that we have a record in time of what this version looked like. Some folks really want to have like an archive of it, because the Google Doc is changing. You can always go into view history, but if you just want a snapshot of it in time, they can just give you a PDF of it. And then the link so that it's still an active interactive document. So here's what that looks like if I were to say, let's grade it. I have lots of users here, but let's go to me. Skip ahead to my submission. Notice that even though there's a hyperlink here, it is not alive because the Moodle assignment tool basically takes a photo of whatever the student has uploaded. So that's not a live link, but over here, you'll get to that link. It will be in the side panel here. So if I were to click on that, I would have to leave the site. Yes, let's go ahead and leave it. There I am. I am in the Google Doc, which, as you can see, we've made some changes in. So that works. Oh, notice that it overwrote our Moodle, because your students probably will not click the magical button that says, oh, it's going to make me log in again. What a bummer. That says open in a new window. Students will never remember to do that, I don't think. But if you have the opportunity to do it, you should. So that's what it looks like in the assignment tool. Here's what it looks like if you ask them to use a forum. Now, if you want them to see each other's or maybe even comment on each other, say they're in workshop groups or something, using a discussion forum is really great. And then once they post to that, here's just a hyperlink. They just hyperlink their text. So if for some reason your students put the link, but they don't make it a hyperlink, I'll show you again. What you can do is just copy it, right? It's possible. Did they go back to me? No. It's possible they will forget to make it a hyperlink, and then this wouldn't be active. You'll just have the address, in which case you would just copy it and then paste it into your address bar. And that will take you to the same place. So that's the very quick and dirty of how to use Google Docs, how to get students to notice that there's a PDF here also uploaded. Oh, before I wrap, the first page when you're looking at this assignment viewer is whatever was in the online text box. If you want to get to whatever was uploaded, you have to arrow over. So notice that starting on page 2 is when that PDF of the document actually starts. So that's just a good thing to note. So let me stop sharing for a second and ask you guys if you have questions or if there's something I can clarify or show you again.
Robbie, is there like a page break in Google Docs? Because I hate it when I'm trying to show something on the screen and students are still typing and it keeps moving my thing down the screen.
Yes, I will show you where that is. So if we're here, let's say I want to put a page break before the why I use docs, you just insert break.
Okay, perfect.
Page break.
I knew it must be in there somewhere.
Well, I think I'm still editing. I'm still suggesting. So notice that you get these funny green brackets, and this is my recommendation. I'm going to say that's a great idea. Robbie will accept that suggestion, but I'm also going to go back to editing. So any other questions? Anything else I could show you while I'm in here?
That's actually really helpful, Robbie. Thank you.
Okay, well, let me stop share. We are at time. I don't want to keep you longer. I'm going to actually go ahead and stop the recording.